Now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our show. We have our superstar panel today. Attorney Marlon Prime and Attorney Vanita Banks will also be appearing today. In the news, it's been taken over by the presidential politics. And there are so many legal consequences of what's occurring nationally until I think that we ought to talk about this. This week, we've seen some historical attacks on museums again. And so what the administration is doing is they're trying to, quote, whitewash history, starting with the institution of slavery, for example. Slavery began in America, as you well aware, in 1619. Slavery was indentured servitude, where Black folks from Africa were required to work for free, and they created great wealth in America. This free labor fueled the economy, particularly not just in the South, but the whole country. And it had a significant economic impact. You know, people worked for free. And then by 1865, we had the Emancipation Proclamation, and subsequently we had the 13th Amendment. But even after passage of those laws, we had the Black codes, we had lynching, we had murder of Black folks, and we had Jim Crow laws up until the late 60s. I attended segregated schools, I think, until 1969. And so even though we had the Supreme Court decision that dealt with in 1954, but the implementation of that took decades. So here we are today, and now we see this ongoing attack on cities that we have Black mayors in Democratic states. So to start the discussion off today, one of the things that's been bothering me, my panel, is that when I look at TV and I see, to distract away from the Jeffrey Epstein debacle, we see troops, National Guard, patrolling cities such as DC now, then LA, now DC. And it's just a matter of time in my mind before something bad occurs. But my concern is the federal intervention, which I feel is probably not the most legally justified type intrusion, its so-called crackdown is worrisome to me. I don't know how most people feel about that, but when I see troops patrolling our cities, and I know that when you're trained in infantry, you're not trained to police, you're trained to murder people, to kill. That's what you're trained for. And so I'm trying to figure out, for the life of me, why does anybody in America think this is a good idea? I don't know.
Yeah, these are certainly trying times that we're in on all those fronts, Nathaniel. First of all, in terms of Washington, D.C., both of my adult children live there. And I think what the audience really needs to understand that the Congress basically took $1 billion from the District of Columbia's budget. I mean, so if you truly wanted to make an impact on crime, I think one of the things you want to do is make sure they have sufficient budget so they can address the crime issues. The mayor has asked for additional resources for police. That's something that can be done. So the problem that I see is that, having National Guard troops that have not been in coordination with the local authorities is a recipe for disaster. I'm hearing that there's issues regarding who's in charge, and the courts basically said, hey, it's the DC police. But if there's a lack of coordination, as you know, in handling these police misconduct cases over the years, it's a recipe for disaster. And I'm not sure that these troops have the necessary training on just everyday policing. The modern practices in policing are de-escalation, diversity, understanding people of different backgrounds. So if you're lacking that, it's only a matter of time before there's a disaster. And finally, you have to look no further than, my home state of Ohio, where the National Guard came to Kent State University. And, we all know the story that people were shot, and it's still, a very sour point here in the state of Ohio. So we really need to be concerned about that issue and say, hey, of course, we want to make sure that people are taken care of, that crime isn't rampant, but there's ways to go about it that are going to be effective, and then the ways that are going to be destructive.
And I'm wondering, colleagues, what statistics are we looking at when we talk about crime rates across this nation? If you look at national statistical models, we find that DC, the District of Columbia, is not even ranked in the top 10 for state crime rates. In fact, and we also saw, similar to other cities, that the violent crime rates in DC are the lowest that they've been in over 30 years. Similar to Chicago, violent crime rates have dropped 31% year over year, and that's similar to the drops in other cities. And when you look at Chicago, is ranked number 10 on a list that I'm looking at right now, and St. Louis, Baltimore, New Orleans, Detroit, Cleveland, and Las Vegas, they rank in the top 5. And it's interesting that, and you mentioned it, Attorney Lee, that these attacks by the administration are on cities. And again, crime rates in urban areas are increasingly dropping, but these are cities that are run by African American mayors. Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson. You had Los Angeles with Mayor Bass, and of course our mayor in Washington, D.C. And so we're hearing this week that his next target is Chicago, although the Chicago mayor has reported that he has not received any information in that regard. And there's already a lawsuit pending challenging the authority of the president to take over our city in this way. And I don't know if you're aware that there's a 1898 act that prevents the president from using the military as a domestic police force. And that's exactly what we're seeing in those cities wherein he has weaponized the National Guard.
It's an excellent point, Counsel, but there's one thing I want to add on in terms of research. Now, here's what's concerning to me. In order to interpose a diversion by not talking about the rape of these minor children with the Jeffrey Epstein debacle, and so we create this controversy. Crime is out of control in DC. Well, let's talk about crime in DC. The murder rate in DC, according to statistics I'm looking at, was somewhere between 17 to 27 person per 100,000. Meanwhile, Republican-controlled state of Missouri had the highest homicide rate in the country at 69.4 deaths per 100,000. And then you look at all the Republican-controlled states and cities, their homicide rates were higher than DC. And so DC is not even close to having the country's highest homicide rate. There was 49 other cities with higher. The problem is the states that are controlled by Republicans, like in Indiana, we have certain parts of the state that have a higher crime rate, such as on West Northwest, when in Gary, for example, they had a high homicide rate because they lack the resources to hire more policemen and have the budget to protect the citizen because the state direct funding. And so instead of trying to solve the problem, all they do is criticize the people for the problem. Meanwhile, the resources are poured into different areas of the state unfairly. So it goes on and on. Like in the city of Indianapolis, people were complaining about potholes, and they didn't have potholes in Carmel. Well, why is that? Well, they have like what 20% of the population of Indianapolis, but they get the same amount of money from the state for road repair. So resources is paramount to having good and safe government in America. So if you don't get the resources, and those resources are controlled in state by governors, and the federal Congress, which is controlled by Republicans in the House and the Senate. So these funding are critical to public safety and well-being. And so to criticize a city when the city doesn't get the revenue they need, like the other cities, is unfair.
I couldn't, agree with you more. And, the issue of crime and prevention is a complex issue. And you're not going to solve that by having National Guard troops that aren't properly trained. What has really been shown to be effective is to make sure that you have community organizations, community policing, because the reality of it is no matter how many police you have to have the cooperation of the citizens and people in those communities. If they don't trust the police, they're not going to report crime, and crime's not going to get solved. So the models that work are, having more people that are trained to do policing. Policing is a profession. You can't just have National Guardsmen who are, good people, but they have other jobs during the week. The military is a part-time job. So you're putting people in that situation that don't have this training. And if you really want to be effective, statistics have indicated that, you want to look at after-school programs. You want to look at de-escalation training for officers. You want to look at after-school programs, youth sports programs. All of those things cost money, and they go to your point that if you really want to solve the problem, you should provide the appropriate resource. It's not appropriate, in my view, an example of DC, to cut $1 billion from their budget and then send National Guard troops that have no training. The other thing that's really interesting and really, dangerous in my view is not only do they have National Guard troops, but the Secretary of Defense in the last few days has indicated that he has authorized these National Guard troops to be armed with live ammunition. So you have people with no training, no adequate training in community policing and the role of policing in a very toxic situation where they don't have the support of the people. It's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And as we were hosting the show last week, after the administration had taken over the DC Police Department, which resulted in a lawsuit, the administration immediately stated that they would return leadership and control back over to the DC police commander. So we in fact saw that happened. And you're absolutely right, Attorney Primes and Lee. In fact, during the Obama administration, there was a big focus on policing and police reform. And all of that work came together in a final report as a result of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. And the mandate and the purpose of that task force was to frankly just identify the best policing practices in the nation and offer recommendations on how to promote effective crime reduction while at the same time building public trust, because you can't be successful in this effort unless you have the trust of the public. And so the recommendations, and this is a playbook that anyone that is interested in police reform across our nation should pull out and use as their model. The recommendations were presented in 6 topics. One, building trust and legitimacy. Two, policy and oversight. Technology and social media. Community policing, which is so important in education. And officer safety and wellness. So we have the tools. And back to your point, attorneys and colleagues, if you take money away from cities and jurisdictions and you don't invest in things that you say are important, because there's been a big emphasis here in the city of Chicago on investing in our youth. Back to Attorney Prime's point, making sure that there's summer programs and there are jobs and that we're investing in education opportunities. And we're seeing a lot of those programs being stripped because of funding going away. And so it really is disingenuous what we're seeing in terms of rhetoric. I was just saying to before the show that yesterday I'm hearing the words of the president as he's declaring that African American women, he called them African American ladies, are begging him to come to Chicago because of the crime rates. That is not true. I'm not aware of any African American ladies that are begging the National Guard to be unleashed in the city of Chicago. But that statement was made and communicated across a local Chicago media yesterday, and I don't know if it gained any national traction.
That's terrible. Imhotep, you got a question or comment for us today, sir? Go ahead.
Wow, man, that was a lot to take in right there. Good morning to everyone here. Attorney Banks, man, I'm telling you, that was a lot. I couldn't stomach when he said that too. I communicate with a lot of people from Chicago, especially my one of my late relatives is Ralph Metcalf. I'm telling myself now, one of my late relatives is the late Ralph Metcalf, one of Chicago's great knowns. So I have a lot of family there. I communicate with people there. I just talked to a lady who's well known on the West Side, a mentor, and has a building and a program for revitalization over there. Just communicated this with her last night about Black women saying this, and she almost blew a rocker off and talked about, he's gonna have another thing coming. Going to Spike Lee already told him, you come to New York, you're gonna have a problem. It's gonna be a problem. Urban areas. Even LA is not laid out like Chicago and New York. You guys have been all over. For those listening who don't know the topography probably of different cities, DC is, Banneker made it into the Masonic way of building, but it doesn't have tall buildings. And so when you talk about Chicago and New York, even LA, because of earthquakes and stuff, you don't have a lot of tall buildings, and then you have a lot of mountains. Now, LA can be a problem once you get outside the inner city. Like I know from when I was out there, they're not going to East LA because that's where most of your gangs and your real hardcore people are. The local police don't go to East LA, so they're not going to East LA. And then if you started going back towards west, going towards Santa Monica, going up in Sherwood, Sherman Oaks, and going up in those hills, you're going to have some problems there too. But the topography of Chicago and New York is a whole different thing. The military told him the last time there's no way in the world they could even deal with the topography of Chicago. Remember, they ran him out of there, Attorney Banks. He called himself coming back the first time, and then he backed up on him. Remember, he was going to have a rally or something there, and then he backed out of it because he realized there's just too many blind spots. You just got too many blind spots. There's no way in the world for this. There's no way in the world you're gonna have a problem. So that's not. But I want to get to you the lawlessness of this. The federal court in Florida told DeSantis and Trump and all them to cease and desist operations of Alligator Alcatraz. DeSantis comes out this morning and says he's going to defy the federal judge's order. He's not paying attention. Trump also floated with the idea of outlawing flag burning. And I know when I got my minors in political science, so mother being a lawyer and stuff, but I know from reading these cases that flag burning was upheld by the Supreme Court. Texas versus Johnson was the case exactly, people, if you're not listening. Scalia was the deciding vote on that. Ironically, Scalia said that was one of his regrets was being the deciding vote on that issue. But nevertheless, someone must have got to him and told him he couldn't do that because he backed off of that. But what are we seeing? Where do we go from here when we have a governor, a duly elected governor, telling a federal judge, I'm going to defy your order, I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to do what I want to do? We have a government talking about crime, and yet they're operating as a mafioso government and are not abiding by the laws and being criminal in all their behavior. My mother told me, she's almost 84, she told me she's never seen nothing like it. She's never seen nothing like this, and it's never, ever, she's never seen anything like this. Just like Putin getting in the beast last week. I didn't know about that until Monday or Tuesday. Did you guys see that? Putin got in the beast. My mother said she's never seen a dignitary or a president from another country get into the beast. Generally, they fly and come in wherever they go. They have their own transportation. But they got into the beast. There was an hour or so before they got to the location to where there was no interpreters there. There was no Secret Service there. We don't have any tapes or discuss. Putin can sit up and play games all he wants to. He was a KGB person. I'm sure he can speak 5-6 languages. He knows English. So we don't know what was discussed in the beast that whole time. But she said she's never seen anything like that, having airmen lay out a red carpet. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. It hurt me to see airmen taping down the red carpet for Vladimir Putin. And then all this talk went on these last few days. You brought all these dignitaries in on Monday from Europe. Zelensky was here. They're trying to play nice to him. And then the very next day, Putin sends 60 drones into Ukraine and then blows up a United States factory. So we have lawlessness. We have complete lawlessness, yet they're talking about crime. It blows my mind. Thanks for taking my call.
Wow, that was a lot to consider.
And I agree wholeheartedly with your mother caller that who would have ever thought that we would have seen a brutal dictator welcomed here in the United States on U.S. soil and having the red carpet rolled out for him and seeing pictures of him riding in the beast and then having a conference. You can't call it a press conference because the press was not allowed to ask any questions, where this brutal dictator, who's at the same time plotting brutal attacks on community neighborhoods in Ukraine, he's speaking first, number one, and in his own language, not even interpreted. Just something I agree with you, caller. One would never think that we, would see. We never saw a photo of Ronald Reagan with Gorbachev, right? We never, saw that kind of image at that time. So just absolute lawlessness.
For the benefit of our audience, the Beast, of course, is a limo car specially equipped for the President of the United States. So when they travel, they have a private jet to fly this military type car, bulletproof vehicle to different sites. And it's got all type of communication. And I guess it's bomb-proof, bulletproof to protect the President of the United States. In the history of America, since they've developed this car, I was searching to see whether or not any foreign dictator has ever been allowed to go near this vehicle. And I can understand why the caller is so upset. Not only did he ride in the beast, this protected vehicle for American president, but the red carpet treatment for a brutal dictator who's murdering women and children and trying, it was shameful. And to think that it all played out in public purview, that this terrible act of abandonment of democratic principles and democracy right before our own house. We start worshiping a dictator. It's scary. Now,
the whole day
was. Say? And what did he say that was critical? Well, the dictator thought that mail-in voting was bad. So what does this idiot president say? I mean, the president say, mail-in balloting, we need to get rid of it. So now we have a Soviet dictator telling the president of the United States how to run America.
And let's remember that the president promised to end that war on day one, right? And that, hasn't happened. And that whole day, from my perspective, was a bust. What did that day accomplish? You had these inexperienced U.S. diplomats that don't even know the protocol in receiving another international leader. You've got Putin walking under America's firepower, right? And what was accomplished other than a photo op of Putin with the president of the United States? So he's welcomed by the U.S. president to a world stage and treated like he's an equal. From my perspective, the whole roll up to that meeting in Alaska was much ado about nothing. And as we were hearing about it all week, I'm thinking nothing's going to be accomplished by this.
At the same time, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that it really just points to a double standard. Many of your listeners may not recall just the manufactured crises when President Obama was in office. There was nonstop coverage in the conservative media that President Obama allegedly bowed, a normal sign of respect when he was in Japan. And there was allegations that he had a simple bow when he was in Saudi Arabia. And this was just part of normal custom, normal respect. And yet at the same time, these issues that came out with President Putin, the red carpet, driving in a secured vehicle with secured, information, a lot of that just gets zero coverage. So it's very disconcerting. And then I think you all are correct. I mean, what did you get from it except giving, a brutal dictator a platform? So it's very, very troubling in my view as well.
And Trump had been stating all week up to this meeting that he desired a ceasefire. Well, that was the furthest thing from Putin's mind, a ceasefire. As they were talking before they even got back, home, Putin's already planning and sending drones over. And just this week, we've seen like a huge apartment complex with civilians decimated. And so there's no good faith on that side. And again, it's nothing that, we've witnessed in our lifetimes. And back to the protocol where you have Putin speaking first. Anyone that is familiar with these types of international protocols and meetings knows that just doesn't happen.
Well, I tell you, moving on, because this so-called meeting was just the tip of the iceberg of things that I thought was bad for democracy. we see this constant attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I don't think any of the politicians ever explained why this is a bad idea. But this week, Marlon, your old stomping ground, the Department of Justice, now maybe characterized as Department of Injustice, they attacked George Mason University for violation of Title VI. George Mason University roughly has about 40,000 students and has about 4,500 Black students. They had a very small percentage of Black professors, and the federal government is threatening to, they started an investigation of George Mason back on July 10th. And they came up with these findings that George Mason was acting illegally by having programs to try to increase Black enrollment or Black faculty and staff. And their proposed solution would be that the president of the university, who's Black, personally apologize for the hiring, recruitment, and promotion and tenure of minorities. And so there was a whole list of things in which they're doing, but the attack on George Mason is much more aggressive than the attack on Harvard or Columbia. Now we're getting into, even if you're one of these Black so-called conservative, this got to be alarming to you because of the fact that now we're having a direct attack on issues to promote diversity and inclusion. The problem with that is that if you attend the institution of higher learning, like the master's and doctorate degree, and I've attended some of these seminars, rarely if ever you see a large volume of Black students getting PhDs or masters at university. I remember my own kids graduated from Purdue University, and when my son graduated, I only saw one of the Black students getting a master's degree in business administration. I didn't see any for a doctorate degree. And the same thing for my daughter. There was a lot of Asian students, white students, but I didn't see Black students. So we have such a small percentage of Blacks acquiring those degrees, and now they're under attack. Well, I don't understand this. How in the hell can the Justice Department, Civil Rights Division, who once was something that we all looked up to, how could they turn a blind eye and go in the opposite direction now? I don't get it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The Civil Rights Division, certainly has a stellar history. They were there at the forefront in terms of the desegregation, whether it was the students that integrated the public schools in Little Rock and New Orleans and different parts of the country. And so now they've been repurposed. Instead of looking at their traditional role, what they're doing now is enforcing claims of alleged reverse discrimination. I think your audience really needs to kind of look at, what the alleged charges are. All George Mason is doing is basically saying, hey, we are a public university. We're going to cast a wide net. We're going to ensure that our university is inclusive. It's welcoming to students of color. We're going to make sure that we're casting a wide net regarding faculty. We're going to have programs to ensure that, hey, if you get a degree at this institution, you'll know about the world around you that is diverse. So one of the things I think we have to challenge conservatives on, and even challenge the Department of Justice, is, specifically, you need to really get down to, hey, what is discriminatory? About, making sure that you're giving opportunities to all segments of your population. The other thing is really ironic is that George Mason is in Virginia, and that was the cradle of the Confederacy. The capital of the Confederacy was in Richmond, a few hours from George Mason University. So with that history in mind, an African-American leader that merely says, hey, I'm going to make sure that there's opportunities, the Department of Justice, of all people, is leading the charge to reverse that effort is really troubling, very, very troubling, that we should all, pay attention to. The other thing that's really interesting, too, is that the reason why we've been able to have great transformation in our society is through the pathway of education. Many many of us, our parents were blue collar workers, certainly nothing wrong with that, but we got opportunities to go to college. When my parents were coming up, they were born in the 1930s. The doors of opportunity for college, they didn't have the loan programs, they didn't have the grant programs. So a lot of these efforts were helpful in diversifying our colleges and universities, and by extension, it helped individuals move into the middle class and beyond because of the ability to get a college education. So, these have a lot of consequences because it sends an important message that taking these relatively minor steps, in my view, are going to be met by resistance.
And you're starting again with a false premise, a executive order declaring DEI policies as, quote, illegal. And we're looking at these six actions that the Civil Rights Division is requiring George Mason to take, one of which is that they will personally apologize, that the president will personally apologize, that, as was mentioned, Attorney Lee, for promoting unlawful discriminatory practices in hiring, promotion, and tenure practices. So the mere fact that a university has a program, and I'm not afraid to call it diversity, equity, and inclusion, although those words have been weaponized by this administration to mean something totally different. The affirmative action policies that we've seen that are still law, Title VII is still the law. Title VI, which they're using here in the university, which is applicable in the university context. Actually, what George Mason was doing was ensuring that professors and instructors and other university staff reflect the diversity, as Attorney Prime stated, of our nation and our world, and to implement policies that, again, are not intended to and have never been intended to hire or promote individuals that are not qualified. So that's the false premise, right? But were implemented so that individuals who historically have not had access to opportunities to become law professors and executives in corporations could have that opportunity. And so to flip it on its head and use the civil rights laws, it's just basically a travesty to promote, from my perspective, Attorney Prime's illegal actions.
Okay, here's more shocking. Here's the data that I pulled from the website. They have about 40,000 students and about 11% are Black, right? Their faculty, 1,500 faculty, 9.5% are Black, about 77% are white, 11.4% are Asian. And then you have about 2% other ethnic groups from different parts of the world. So they have less than 10% of the faculty members are Black, and they want them to apologize for hiring that 9.5%. It's insulting. So what they want is down to zero. So folks, this is dangerous rhetoric that we're seeing. If the federal government is attacking a university for having less than 10% of its faculty members being Black, to apologize for hiring those folks, quite frankly, they're pushing segregation. The big S word that people are not saying, that they're not saying out loud. They want to have segregated public institution. How
And
else
you
do you explain it?
you just gave the statistics, and you asked if they want to, bring those numbers down to zero. The answer is yes. In many cases, the and not majority, and that's what's part of the problem. The minority has 90% of the seats. They want 100. Back to your point, Attorney Lee, it's just a move toward total segregation.
And I
And,
think we got to.
and it is unlawful to use the civil rights laws in this way. Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in education programs and activities receiving federal funding. And then a violation of did I say Title VII? I meant Title VI, can result in the loss of federal funds. Uh, Attorney Primes,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's a big stick that the United States has. They're basically saying they're threatening the ability of these public universities to, have students get financial aid. And some of these institutions, as many of we all know, tuition and expenses can be in excess $50, $60, $70,000. And so when you're talking, about coercion, the government can come in and say, hey, if you don't do our bidding, we're going to limit not only your funding, but the ability of your students to get loans. So it really is crippling on these universities. Now, the other thing to really point out that I think your audience should be aware of, that in terms of looking at the future, the U.S. Supreme Court pretty much gave the green. And this week, in a 5-4 decision, basically indicated that a decision in the federal court in Massachusetts, indicating that the administration was going to limit grants for DEI research. The Supreme Court basically came in and said that they were blocking this temporary restraining order, and that the case could proceed on. So it sends an important signal that the Supreme Court, when a case gets to them, very well may be inclined to say that just casting a wide net, to make sure that our society is inclusive, they may very well deem that discriminatory. And this research, it can concern making sure diseases that impact people of color, disproportionate diabetes, sickle cell, a whole range of particular issues as relates to health outcomes. This is certainly very devastating and concerning, and it sends an important message to the administration that, hey, everything that they do is going to be pretty much affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's deeply, deeply troublesome. And the other thing I'll point out finally is that when many of us were in law school, there was a preaching of, hey, small government, we don't want an omnipresent or overriding federal government. And now conservatives are in power and they flip the script. Yeah, we'll do everything. We'll get involved with universities. We'll get involved with cities. So it really just turns this argument that was first pushed in the Reagan administration in that era on its head, that it's really not about small government. It's about getting your way and doing it by any means necessary.
Wow.
Well, I think it's about small government in the sense that the federal agencies that were established to provide support to states in times of crisis, for example, FEMA, the National Weather Service, and others have the Department of Education, or the Department of Social Security, and so many others are being, frankly, dismantled so that they cannot provide support to communities when they need them. We're seeing all of these devastating weather events occurring, whether it's flooding or hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. And we're having conversation around, if you're a blue state, we're going to decide if we're going to deploy resources to you, and it's being done, based on political ideology. And again, this is just totally unacceptable. It's disgraceful and should not happen, in a democracy.
Yeah, and it really just kind of goes back to Nathaniel's comments earlier, just about misinformation regarding slavery. We have the same misinformation, Attorney Banks, as it relates to climate change, which is making it more likely to have these catastrophic storms. And the other thing, in terms of the role of the federal government, that's something that's going to be beyond these local communities that are devastated by these storms. And the reality of it is that this money for FEMA to go in and provide aid and assistance, that comes from the taxpayers of across the country of all political stripes. And to play politics and say, hey, I'm going to slow walk aid if this state doesn't support me, is certainly very dangerous and disconcerting.
Well, I'm concerned about this setbacks that we're seeing, particularly the Blacks in our country. We see the constant attacks every day, and right before our eyes, most people don't realize is that they're turning back the clock on racial progress that we made in the last century. Right before our eyes, they're doing it drip by drip, like 1,000 different cuts.
Okay, so I'm on the phone.
They're doing it every day. I'm sorry, what do you say, caller?
I'm sorry. Thank you for having me. This is Renee Schulk. I'm calling in to just make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to get off the phone. I believe that African Americans, Black folks, cannot do this alone. We actually need to have other groups to join us, because when we make progress, they make progress. And that's inclusive of women as well, and white women who have liberal art degrees, because we found that out when they got rid of the DEI programs in the federal government, that white women were receiving the benefit of that, most benefits of that. So I believe we need to get people on board with fighting with the cause for Black Americans, because if we lose, they lose. And I want to also say that Democratic leaders are not doing us any favor when they don't get on board with backing the different candidates that win nominations. For example, in New York City, when Zoran won and majority of the leaders decided that they're not going to endorse him, that sends a really poor message to the other side that they could do whatever they want with us, and we don't have a coalition and a strong standard. Also, the rules don't apply. There are no rules any longer. That the Constitution, I believe, is going to need to be changed, because that was based on white gentlemen's handshakes, which meant that we made some rules, but we didn't cover all the gaps because we trust you. We trust that you are going to be in power for the longest and that you're going to do right by what we put down on this paper. Well, unfortunately, those white men are not quite the same white men that we have today that are in power. And so we're going to need to change the Constitution and make some more amendments if we ever get back in power, which I think we will.
Wait one second. Hold on one second. You said something earlier. You covered about fight of nerve, but there's one thing I need for you to give me a better explanation. You said that they're not supporting the Democratic mayor or candidate. What are the reasons why they view this candidate as such a danger to their financial structure of the city? Why are these money people against this person just because he's saying he wants to spend more money on poor folks, or is there something else going on?
Oh, I absolutely believe there's something else going on. I think because they're all wedded to AIPAC, and I know you all know who AIPAC is. They're the Jewish organization that support Israel, and not just Israel, but anything that Bibi wants to do. And so if you don't stand with Bibi and you don't stand, or if they consider you not standing with Israel, then AIPAC will send somebody to primary you, or they will pull your support. Well, Hakeem Jeffries receives a lot of funding from AIPAC, and so does Schumer and several of the other. I wouldn't be surprised if Gillibrand is on the list as well. So AIPAC and they were responsible for getting rid of one of the black representatives in New York City. So I would say AIPAC has a strong hand in who is going to get elected in New York City many of the time. And because Zoran hasn't gone through AIPAC or the Dem leadership to get approval, they find him as a threat. And that's my personal opinion, and that's the things that I'm hearing. Back up a second,
but be specific, though. Why does AIPAC view the mayor of New York as a threat to what's going on in Israel, since the mayor of New York has no control of what Trump and the Netanyahu do in Israel? I don't get in Gaza. Why would they not be so against this guy? I don't get that part.
Because they can't control him. And if you can't control somebody, you don't know what they're going to do. So they're threatened by him, even though he is not trying to interfere with Bibi, or he's not a Zionist. He is just saying that you basically can't go and kill people because, you know, you got attacked, but you can't kill millions of children and women and people who are innocent and starve them to death, which is what was done to them during the Holocaust. You can't perpetrate the same atrocities on other people that was done to you because you were attacked. Yes, it was horrible, but you can't justify that with killing millions of children or hundreds of thousands of children. So they're not sure what he's going to do. This is about Bibi. The Israeli people, the Jewish people are not like that on a whole. It is Bibi who's making these decisions because he needs to stay in power.
Well, one thing you need to know that maybe most people don't recognize or appreciate is Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the Japanese soldiers attacked Pearl Harbor and killed about 1,600 military officers, sailors and soldiers. Terrible tragedy. And we didn't respond by killing the military. We dropped atomic bombs to wipe out hundreds of thousands of people who affected them for generations. So the American way really is to retaliate with atomic bombs. That's what we've done historically.
Well, I'm going to get off the phone, but I want to leave with one last question so that we can start doing some active planning. What do we do about it, attorneys? How do we fight this legally? What are your suggestions on what we do? And I really thank you for the show, and I'm going to hang up and let you kind of ponder that question. If you have any suggestions, I really appreciate it.
Well, I think that, a rainbow coalition is right. I think that there are a lot of things that working people have in common. And I think what politicians do is they try to divide us. I mentioned last week about really an excellent book. It was a sequel to The Warmth of Other Suns, and it was called Caste. And it really makes that very point that there were a lot of natural coalitions between the sons of those that were part of the Great Migration, African Americans that moved from the South, with the immigrants that came from Europe because of war and famine and a whole slew of other things. But instead of working together, they were kind of pulled apart by various issues. So I think in terms of political, we should try to find ways to build those coalitions, a rainbow coalition, because a rising tide is going to lift all boats, and that means having a policy as it relates to, helping working people, making sure there's a social safety net, because but for the grace of God, anybody can be down in their luck. So I think those are things that we also have to talk about. And I think we also have to talk about the question of DEI, that it's not a net negative for our white brothers and sisters to make sure that we have equal employment opportunity. It's not in the interest of overall society to have, educated African Americans with advanced degrees that can't get a job. And that's what really happened before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So I think those are among the things that we need to do, and also being more supportive of our existing institutions. our Black organizations, the NAACP, the Urban League, our professional organizations, our Black churches. Getting involved in those can be very helpful. Or also being involved in your community. We need people that are youth coaches, football, basketball, track. We need people that are active in our committees. There's a whole bunch of things that we all can do to move the ball forward and make our communities stronger and more cohesive.
And at this point, being in community is so very important because it can be very, very isolating and lonely out there. As every day we're being barraged with these illegal and unconstitutional actions, and we can't emphasize enough the fact that we've got a serious, challenge on our hands as we move toward the midterm elections. We've got to be on the ground in unity with our grassroots organizations, those organizations that actually do the work to ensure that we're educating every citizen about the fundamental right to vote and how important that is. And so we just have to continue to stress and emphasize the importance of exercising our fundamental right to vote. And all of those things that Attorney Prime said on the local level in terms of all politics is really local. So we've got to get engaged in our communities on those levels.
As a point of departure on this issue, because we're out of time, real quickly, there's about 10 things, and I agree with what councilors are saying, but there's something of all the things they talked about. The number one thing that we have to do is voter participation, caller. That's number one. But the second part of that is that we also have to serve on juries, because you're going to see a lot of these litigation things become jury trials. And so you got to make sure you're part of the process. The third thing, though, is that folks, you got to target specific corporations in order to get economic justice. I think this attack on Target was well timed. They've watched the valuation decrease by billions of dollars. But I think that it's very effective if you unify behind that. The one thing corporations understand is money, or lack thereof. So if you cut off the supply of money, you could get economic justice at the corporate level. And then there's a whole lot of other things but we're running out of time. But local government participation, what we don't talk about is a lot of things that affect your daily life, but you have to participate in local government at a higher level. And the next week, we're out of time now. We'll cover some more of these important topics. But thank you, callers, for calling in today, and thank you for my superstar panel. And Lord bless and keep you until we talk once again next Saturday. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.